approval. That's what I felt that Warren felt. He not only knew that his God held him, but that his eye was also invested on him. God lays his hand on him, even when no one else shows an interest in him. Is he an easy person to talk to? No, he wasn't. You had to spark the conversation. You had to probe with questions to try and find what it is that we had actually in common with him. And yet, he knew that God was interested in him. There's something else that I noticed about Warren, that he had a steadfast patience. It's the reason why I asked for Revelation chapter 3:10. That patience is not the same as endurance. Endurance means that you persevere through something that you find exceedingly difficult. And yet Warren did not spend his time talking about how difficult life is. The closest we got was to his knee. And yet he could make a joke about it. His eye was on the goal. You have kept my word of patience. In other words, you, Lord, since you have kept my command. This part of Revelation speaks to a church that he says, I know is weak. I know that you have little strength, and yet you have kept my word, and you have kept it patiently. How many of us have to go through life needing that constant reassurance that we're on the right track? I mean, encouragement is good, but when there's little of it, and when you see that the things around you are so hard and heavy and pressing that you feel like succumbing to it. And yet he has a patience that is able to sustain him, that I have a hope that God has a goal for me. There is no hurry or rush that I saw in what Warren was doing. His hope rested on an eternal truth, that God is love. And when you consider that, it is like God takes a bow and an arrow in an archer's hand. As we submit to God, he takes us up like an archer would take a bow and an arrow, and he sets the arrow against the string. And God is aiming at something that we cannot see. And when he pulls back and he stretches, we often cry out, I can't stand it. This pressure is too much for me. And God does not heed our cry, but continues to stretch us until his purpose is actually in sight for us. And then he lets go, so that we might hit the target that he has purposed for us. That steadfast patience was seen in Warren. Entrust yourself to the Lord's hand, for he has made a purpose for which we may not see. Warren might not have done much, except that he did example that for us. The third thing I noticed is that there was a quiet humility. One of the things that Warren did when he led communion, I remember getting him up here one time, or encouraging him. We didn't have a pastor at the time, and we shared, as he was a deacon, we'd share the role of being speaking and sharing a word. And he did that one time. He told me that the Gideons had encouraged him to speak, and so I encouraged him to come and speak as well. After he'd finished preaching, he said, Gaz, I don't think that's for me. He didn't actually say why. I think he found it just awfully hard. So, Around the Lord's table, though, there was this common phrase that John shared with me the other day. He remembers Warren always praying, "Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin." And Warren walked in this life with humility. Rarely did you hear him boast about achievements, satisfied to know that all his falling shorts with God and with mankind was covered not by his goodness, but by the blood that runs down from Jesus' wounds. There's a tombstone which reads, and I think Warren would have taken one of these ones up. It was of William Carey when he was asked, "What would you like to put on your tombstone?" He said, "I want you to write nothing more than this: a wretched, poor and helpless worm. On your kind arms I fall." Such is his humility. I don't have any good works to bring me into your presence, but what I do have is your kind arms to carry me home. A fourth thing that I noticed is that there was a quiet generosity. As Kai mentioned earlier, Paul wrote to the Corinthian church, "Each of you should give what you have decided in your hearts to give, not reluctantly, not under compulsion, for the Lord loves a cheerful giver." When Warren saw a need, he quietly sought out a person and involved him. I know that quite a few times we had youth group trips away to the Blue Mountains for camps and that. And there was always an opportunity where